Well, the clone troopers have a pretty well documented history in both Legends and the new canon heading into the Empire and even beyond. Their opponents in the Clone Wars, the battle droids of the CIS army, continue to play a role in the galaxy as well, culminating in helping to save it. For this, we're specifically going to be focusing on Legends again. The universal shutdown signal sent after Anakin killed the entire Separatist Council may have stopped the immediate fighting, but small sections of battle droid armies would still be reactivated by Separatist holdouts for decades, most notably in the reconquest of the Rim by the Empire after the end of the Clone Wars, which saw the Empire fighting in the Outer Rim to retake worlds which remained under loose Separatist leadership. The Battle of Mustafar famously had the holdout faction of Geonosian Separatist engineer Gizor Delso re-enabling a battle droid army to take up arms against the Empire in Battlefront 2, before they were taken out by the 501st. But that was only one example of a very common refrain taking place across the galaxy, especially the Outer Rim, in the decade after the Clone Wars. While we are focusing on Legends here, this does happen in canon as well to some extent, including in places which get visual depictions, unlike a lot of the Legends stories, making them really convenient to show in a video. While heavily armed Separatist holdouts weren't exactly rare, they didn't consist of anywhere near all of the equipment used by the CIS, leaving a huge surplus of now defunct battle droids, not to mention the ships and other equipment strewn across the galaxy. Plenty of these would have been disabled in the middle of battles on backwater planets that the Empire wouldn't establish direct control of again for years, leaving big opportunities for enterprising individuals and companies to pick up their own small droid armies to use under private ownership. B2 super battle droids, for example, were often stockpiled and sold off, finding their way into the hands of crime lords, according to the new Essential Guide to Droids, something which probably happened even more regularly with the even more common droid models like the B1. Some of the droid models became strongly associated with specific worlds, even without necessarily being part of Separatist holdout activity. The tall, spindly Octoptara droids, for example, often made their way into the hands of the government of formerly Separatist Uba 4, which maintained them in defense of the planet for a long time following the Clone Wars. This went beyond just leftover hardware making its way into private hands or the hands of other smaller governments, which sometimes found even more ways to benefit from CIS technology. The Hapes Consortium, for example, became home to some of the many fleeing CIS engineers, where they likely helped contribute to the design of new Hapen ships like the Mytil Fighter. Those who didn't join the Hapens could often be seen liking this video and subscribing for more, like you can do right now, a sign that they developed not just new technologies but also great taste. Many of the leftover droids did also end up under the Empire's direct control, however, and from there they would make their way into a variety of positions under Palpatine's rule and even beyond. The Corporate Sector Authority became a big beneficiary of this, as a governing body of a region of space run by corporations loyal to the Republic during the Clone Wars, and which was given a large amount of autonomy under the Empire as a result. CIS technology of all kinds, including 6 Recusant-class destroyers, and even some of the old Republic military equipment they were looking to upgrade away from, like the Victory Star destroyers, was sold off to the CSA to use in its brutal enforcement of its rule over the corporate sector, mostly consisting of the impression or eradication of local species, something the Empire was perfectly happy for them to do. Not all of the Empire's new droid acquisitions were sold off or given away, though. Some did remain in direct service to the Empire, like I mentioned. The Republic acquired massive amounts of additional droid types beyond the standard B1s and B2s, including crab droids and dwarf spider droids. The crab droids came primarily from a captured facility on Tar Morden, and largely were relegated to being used in live-fire training exercises by stormtroopers on Karita at the famous Imperial Academy. The dwarf spider droids, however, were almost immediately put back into action against other remaining holdouts, joining early Imperial troopers, including clone troopers, on the front lines against various CIS forces. Some of the more rare CIS droid varieties were salvaged and repurposed this way as well. The B3 Ultra Battle Droids, notable for being just a taller B2 battle droid with built-in tractors it can use to make itself weigh 20 times more, and also notable for being one of my least favorite things in Star Wars for some reason, were captured by the Empire in the hundreds, and despite their reputed effectiveness, they were relegated to being tools in stormtrooper training on Karita, much like the crab droids were, rather than being used in active service like the dwarf spider droids. Despite being over 20 years old by the time of Palpatine's death, These and other droid types would continue to serve in various roles beyond Endor, which kind of makes sense considering the way the Empire was strapped for resources at that point. So if anything, you might have even seen a higher proportion of them enter actual combat roles compared to what they did under Palpatine's rule. Some led to new Imperial tech based on those older designs. The Crab Droid's well-established use and training on Karita led to Karitan engineers developing a new type of walker, the Mountain Terrain Armored Transport, or MT-AT, based on their experience with them. At least the New Essential Guide says they were inspired by Crab Droids, but to me that seems like a really tenuous connection to just draw based on the fact that they have large amounts of legs. So while I'm all for adding connections like this particular one was always a bit weird to me and felt like a stretch. Continuing their active role under the Empire, the Dwarf Spider Droids remained in common use at checkpoints alongside stormtroopers well after Palpatine's reign. But one of the rarest CIS droids actually came back into play following Endor as well, the Scorponok Annihilator droid, which you may recognize from the Book of Boba Fett. These were already incredibly rare during the Clone Wars. They were primarily used by their creators, the Colicoids of Kola, who had also designed the Droideka and the Droid Tri-Fighter. The Scorponoks were mainly intended to be used to defend their home planet, where fewer than 100 existed. Eventually during the war, the Colicoids arranged for some of them to be taken off-world and fight on the front lines, joining Separatist armies on planets like Polani and Formos, where they were instrumental in securing Separatist victories. Their effectiveness drew the curiosity of Palpatine, who ordered the retrieval of several of these droids after the shutdown signal was issued. While most of them were taken in by Imperial researchers, Palpatine had a few of them sent to the deep core world of Biss, where they protected the reborn Emperor's seat of power when he re-emerged into the galaxy 10 years after the Battle of Yavin. Despite this consistent use throughout the period, the sight of these droids would probably still not have been entirely welcome on plenty of worlds, but a new conflict in the galaxy began to shift some of these perceptions. About 45 years after the Clone Wars ended, in 25 ABY, the galaxy was invaded by a species of extragalactic aliens who used biotechnology, so all of their ships and vehicles were alive, even their weapons were alive, and they had a strong hatred of droids or other forms of technology, which they considered heretical, possibly stemming from the destruction of their own galaxy by the Silentium and Abominor, two droid quote-unquote species which had also made their way in small numbers to the galaxy far, far away. In the early phases of this war, the hatred of droids was a strong focus, as droids were destroyed and tossed in giant pits by the invaders, although the focus on droid rights early in the New Jedi Order books covering this conflict didn't really remain as strong throughout the rest of the series. The war having such a focus on technology like this did give an opportunity for various holdovers from the CIS to assist the galaxy they'd once helped overrun themselves in repelling these new invaders, and this gave at least some of these droids a probably much needed rehabilitation in the eyes of the galaxy. We don't have many explicit mentions of this, but there is one particular group which does come up, the Orange Panthex, a group of B-2 super battle droids. The Orange Panthex were deployed on the Yuuzhan Vong-occupied world Mantessa, where they fought off giant fire-breathing animals used as weapons by the Yuuzhan Vong, and which didn't look unlike the Magna Octoptara droids used by the CIS. The fact that the Panthex were droids probably made them a bit more suitable for fighting giant fire-breathers than regular organic troops would have been, but then again that didn't work out so well for the ones on the Invisible Hand who got lit up by R2. The Panthex were instrumental in the Galactic Alliance victory on the planet, and they even received a special commendation from the Galactic Alliance Chief of State, Cal Omas, turning at least these battle droids into some of the many heroes which emerged in the course of one of the most devastating wars the galaxy had faced. Unfortunately, a lot of this is only covered in brief mentions in source books rather than really being worked into any major stories. But much like the Clone Troopers, I do think it's one of the more fun little things that worked its way into some of the later periods of Star Wars. I always really like when we get some of those connections between the different periods, so this is something that I always find interesting. Hope you did too. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to like and subscribe if you did enjoy the video, and hope to see you next time. Bye everyone.